diving into one of rock history's most startling confessions. Paul McCartney, legendary Beatle, songwriting icon, once said there was one person he hated more than anything. And the ripple effect of that hatred reached not just his heartbreaks, but the end of the greatest band on earth. Who is this person? Why did Paul feel this way? And how did it affect his career and life afterwards? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is rarely told on mainstream music shows. The Beatles at their peak. To understand what Paul felt, we must rewind. It's spring 1966. The Beatles are at the top of the world, global icons, musical innovators, heading toward more experimental work. Paul McCartney isn't just frontman, he's the glue. He is deeply invested in the band's craft, its cohesion, its identity. But even at the top, cracks were forming: touring fatigue, business pressures, creative divergence. For Paul, stability in the band unit mattered. He liked structure. He liked when the four of them worked as one. Any disruption felt like a betrayal of that. The intruder, Yoko Ono's arrival. Then comes the turning point. In 1966, on a London night at the Indica Gallery, John Lennon meets the Japanese avant-garde artist Yoko Ono. Her art is provocative, her ideas radical, and John is drawn. At first, Paul thinks, Yoko, just John's friend. But by 1968, Yoko is in the studio. She's sitting next to John during sessions for the White Album. The Beatles had a rule: only the four of them and producer George Martin in the studio. Yoko broke that rule. An EMI technician later recalled, every time Yoko opened her mouth, Paul clenched his jaw and the whole room went silent. For Paul, this wasn't just awkward, it was an affront. He later admitted in an interview that her presence made him feel controlled. That intrusion into his creative safe space began to build the resentment. The tensions escalate. By late 1969, tensions are hitting boiling point. Paul proposed the Get Back project as a way to recapture the band's spirit. He wanted to go back to basics. But John coldly replied, "I've got Yoko. I don't need the Beatles anymore." That line hit Paul like a gunshot. Biographer Hunter Davies called it the gunshot that ended the greatest friendship in rock. On the business side, Paul wanted Lee Eastman, his future father-in-law, to manage their company, Apple Corps. John, under Yoko's influence, backed Alan Klein. That split the group structurally, not just emotionally. Then the fight became public. Paul released Ram, 1971, and attacked John and Yoko with "Too Many People." John responded with "How Do You Sleep?" with George Harrison playing guitar. Paul felt all sides betraying him. Because for the first time, the band wasn't four friends. It was alliances and sidings. The next wound, Heather Mills. Fast forward decades. Paul is still a giant in music, but his personal life takes a turn. In summer 1999, he meets Heather Mills at a charity event. She had lost a leg in an accident. She's resilient, charismatic. For Paul, still grieving his first wife Linda, she represents hope. Within months they're together. In 2002 they marry. But the fairy tale collapses. Heather begins to exert control over his schedule, his staff, his interviews. Tabloids feast. In 2006 she files for divorce and demands $250 million. In 2008 they settle for $24 million. The judge called her claims exaggerated, unreliable. The public turned on her. Paul told a friend, "I lost more than money, I lost face." He never mentioned her again publicly. That experience left Paul wounded, not just emotionally, but publicly. For a man who built his image on melody and harmony, it became a spectacle. He hated that loss of dignity more than the money. The true love. Linda McCartney. Let's rewind further, to the person who was Paul's grounding force. Linda Eastman. The story, in London, Paul is playing piano at a club. Linda is photographing quietly, snaps his photo, smiles. He later said, "In that moment I knew she was different." In March 1969 they marry. John, George, Ringo absent. Paul holds her hand through reporters, silent. He wants private life, not spotlight. But his marriage to Linda also became the source of criticism. When Paul formed the band Wings post-Beatles, he made Linda a member. Critics slammed him. So the same woman who saved him emotionally also became collateral in his public narrative. He adored her, yet the world judged him for it. Why? Hated this more than anything. So when Paul says he hates this more than anything, what is this? It isn't simply one woman or one event. It's the betrayal of trust, the collapse of friendship, the destructive intrusion into his creative and personal world. With Yoko, it was the loss of a bandmate turned friend. With Heather, the loss of dignity, the turning of his private life into harsh public scrutiny. Irony. The woman he adored, the safe harbor, also cost him in the court of public opinion. Why? Hated this more than anything, what Paul really felt. Now let's tie together why the phrase, hated this more than anything, is apt. With Yoko, Paul didn't just dislike the presence. He felt the friendship he cherished was destroyed. It wasn't just about the music, it was about lost trust, lost brotherhood. With Heather, the betrayal was that it all became spectacle. Him being made out as gullible, out of his depth. The world watched, laughed, judged. That stung on a different level. With the structure of the Beatles and his career, he believed what was once sacred, the group, the music, the union, was shattered. In the most recent public reversal, in the podcast McCartney, A Life in Lyrics, Paul sighed. I lost my best friend. It all started when she walked into the studio. That's a raw confession, not filtered. That shows the wound still lingers. Despite decades of touring, composing, acclaim, he still avoids mentioning Yoko in interviews. He once said, curtly, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Light words, but heavy in meaning. She symbolized loss of his friend, his band, his golden era. What can we learn? Reflection for the audience. So what does this all mean? For Paul McCartney, one of the most successful musicians in history, the deepest wounds were not about fame, money or critics. They were about relationships and integrity, creative, personal, and dare I say, emotional. For us as audience, we often see the public success stories, albums, tours, big returns. But we rarely see the emotional cost. Paul reminds us. Even rock gods carry scars. The bigger you rise, the more fragile the foundations can become. Also, respect for boundaries matters. In creative settings, in relationships, when a safe space is disrupted, studio session, band dynamic, personal trust, the ripple can last decades. Finally, the lesson of staying true. Paul kept moving, he kept making music, he kept performing. He didn't drown in bitterness. But the scars remained. And that tells us being human means carrying our past, even as we keep pushing forward. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the emotional, untold side of Paul McCartney's life. If you enjoyed this video on Rock Fame Diaries, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next story behind the legends. Who else's story do you want us to unpack next? Drop a comment below. Until then, keep rocking, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.